The morning alarm buzzed through the Galactic Academy dormitory halls. Kim Tae-ho rolled out of his narrow bed and looked around the room he shared with 3 other students. His roommates were already awake and getting ready for classes. Zexara, the tall blue-skinned Valkyrie, stood nearly 3 meters high. Her crystal-like skin caught the artificial sunlight streaming through their window. She could lift a hovercar with her bare hands, and her body was naturally armored against most weapons. She looked down at Tae-ho with what might have been pity. "Human boy still sleeps like the dead," she said to Morden, their insect-like Zephyrian roommate. Morden's 4 arms moved quickly as he prepared his equipment for the day. His kind could move faster than human eyes could follow, and their reflexes were legendary across the galaxy. The 3rd roommate, Velnash, floated near the ceiling. The Nimari didn't need to walk like other species. His people could control gravity with their minds and read thoughts from across a room. He rarely spoke to Tae-ho directly, preferring to communicate through telepathic whispers to the others. Tae-ho pulled on his academy uniform and grabbed his datapad. The uniform was designed to fit all species, which meant it hung loosely on his human frame. Compared to his roommates, he looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. "Breakfast time," Zexara announced. "Try not to fall behind, human." The dining hall was a massive space filled with students from dozens of worlds. Each species had their own dietary needs, so the food dispensers offered everything from liquid nutrients to chunks of raw metal. Tae-ho got his simple human meal and looked for a place to sit. Most tables were full of students from the same species. The Valkyrie sat with other crystal-skinned giants. The Nimari floated in groups, their forms shimmering as they shared telepathic conversations. The insect-like Zephyrians clustered around tables designed for their multi-limbed bodies. Tae-ho found an empty table and sat alone. He ate his breakfast in silence while listening to the conversations around him. The universal translator made it possible for all species to communicate, but it couldn't translate the feeling of being an outsider. "Look at the little Terran," said a voice behind him. Tae-ho didn't turn around, but he knew the speaker was Vexitar, a Valkyrie from his combat training class. How did something so weak make it into the academy? Vexitar's friends laughed. Their laughter sounded like crystal bells ringing, beautiful but somehow mocking. Tae-ho kept eating, trying to ignore them. "I heard humans can't even see in the dark," said another voice. "And they break if you hit them too hard." "Their minds are so slow," added a 3rd student. "No telepathy, no enhanced processing speed. Just basic animal thinking." Tae-ho's face burned with embarrassment, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help. His grandmother had always told him that showing weakness would only make bullies stronger. The Academy's first class was physical enhancement training. The instructor, Commander Bractel, was a massive Valkyrie whose crystal skin had turned deep red with age. His voice boomed across the training ground as students lined up. "Today we test your natural abilities," Commander Bractel announced. "Strength, speed, endurance. These qualities separate the strong from the weak." The first test was lifting. Each student had to lift weights calibrated for their species. The Valkyrie students easily hoisted bars loaded with metal blocks. The Morathi, slug-like beings who looked slow, surprised everyone by lifting even more weight than the crystal giants. When Tae-ho's turn came, he approached the human-calibrated weights. Even these seemed heavy in his hands. He managed to lift them, but barely. Some students in the watching crowd snickered. "Next test," Commander Bractel called. "Speed trials." The running track was a straight line across the training field. Students ran one at a time while sensors measured their velocity. The Zephyrians moved like blurs, crossing the distance in seconds. Even the floating Nimari could propel themselves faster than Tae-ho could run. When his turn came, Tae-ho ran as hard as he could. His legs pumped and his lungs burned, but his time was the slowest of any student tested. He finished breathing heavily while others barely seemed winded. The final test was endurance. Students had to maintain physical activity until they could no longer continue. The Morathi surprised everyone again by outlasting even the strongest Valkyrie. Their biology was designed for long, sustained effort. Tae-ho lasted longer than expected, but still finished in the bottom quarter of the class. As students filed out of the training ground, he heard more whispered comments about human weakness. The next class was Mental Enhancement Studies, taught by Professor Thexani, the Academy's Nimari director. She floated behind her desk while students took their seats in the tiered classroom. "Today we practice basic telepathic exercises," she announced. Her voice carried the harmonic undertones that marked her species as natural leaders. Those without natural telepathic ability will use the enhancement devices. Taeho put on the neural headset provided for non-telepathic species. The device was supposed to amplify mental signals, but it felt awkward and uncomfortable on his human skull. The exercise was simple. Students had to project a basic image to their classmates. The telepathic species did this easily, filling the room with shared pictures of their homeworlds, favorite foods, or childhood memories. When Taeho concentrated on projecting an image of Earth, nothing happened. The headset buzzed and sparked, but no one received any mental signal from him. Professor Thexani floated over to check his equipment. "The device is functioning properly," she said after running diagnostics. "Some minds simply cannot adapt to telepathic enhancement." More snickers from the other students. Taeho felt his cheeks burn again, but he tried to focus on the rest of the lesson. Professor Thexani demonstrated advanced telepathic techniques that left him completely lost. After class, as students filed out, Taeho overheard a group of Namari students discussing him. "The human's mind is so primitive," one said through the translator. "No telepathic potential at all." "I don't understand why they were accepted into the academy," replied another. "What can such a limited species possibly contribute?" Taeho packed his equipment slowly, waiting for the room to empty before leaving. He didn't want to walk out with the other students and hear more of their comments. The day's final class was xenobiology, taught by Professor Kethran. The elderly Marathi was one of the academy's most respected instructors. His massive, slug-like body moved slowly around the classroom, but his knowledge was vast. "Today we study adaptation," Professor Kethran announced, his voice a wet whisper through the translator. How different species survive in hostile environments. The lesson covered various worlds and the life forms that inhabited them. Desert planets where beings absorbed moisture from the air. Ice worlds where creatures generated their own heat. Gas giants where floating organisms fed on atmospheric chemicals. For the first time all day, Taeho found himself genuinely interested. The diversity of life in the galaxy fascinated him. Each species had found unique solutions to survive in their environment. Now, Professor Kethran continued, "Let us examine Earth and its dominant species." Images of Earth appeared on the classroom screens. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in the atmosphere. Then came pictures of humans in various environments. Desert nomads, Arctic researchers, mountain climbers, deep-sea divers. "Humans are physically unremarkable," Professor Kethran observed. "No natural armor, limited strength, slow movement compared to other species. Yet they spread across their entire world. How do you explain this success?" The question hung in the air. Other students looked puzzled. How could such a weak species dominate an entire planet? Taeho raised his hand slowly. Professor Kethran's eye stalks swiveled to focus on him. "Yes, young Terran?" "We adapt," Taeho said quietly. "Not physically, but mentally. We learn, we make tools. We change our behavior instead of waiting for our bodies to evolve." The classroom fell silent. Professor Kethran's massive form shifted slightly, a sign of interest among his species. "Interesting observation," the professor said. "Can you elaborate?" Taeho felt nervous with all eyes on him, but he continued. "Other species evolved perfect solutions for their environments. But humans evolved the ability to create solutions. We're not the strongest or fastest, but we can learn to overcome any challenge." Professor Kethran was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice carrying unusual emphasis through the translator. "The young human makes an important point. Evolution has two paths. Specialization creates perfect solutions for specific problems. Adaptability creates flexible solutions for unknown challenges. Both have value." After class, as students left the room, Professor Kethran called to Taeho. "Young Terran, please remain a moment." Taeho approached the professor's desk nervously. Had he said something wrong? Professor Kethran's eye stalks studied him carefully. "Your insight today was remarkable," the professor said. "You see patterns that others miss. This is a rare gift." "I just answered your question, Professor." "No, you did more than that. You demonstrated why your species earned a place in this academy. Physical strength and mental speed are valuable, but wisdom is rarer than either." Taeho felt a warmth in his chest. For the first time since arriving at the academy, someone had seen value in his humanity rather than weakness. The other students mock what they don't understand. Professor Catherine continued. They measure worth by their own standards, but the galaxy is vast and full of challenges that raw power cannot solve. As Taeho left the classroom, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe he didn't belong here in the way the other students did. Maybe his path would be different, harder, lonelier. But Professor Catherine had seen something in him worth nurturing. Walking back to his dormitory, Taeho ignored the whispered comments from passing students. Let them think him weak. Let them dismiss humanity as inferior. He would prove them wrong, not by becoming something else, but by showing them what humans could accomplish when they refused to give up. His grandmother had always said that rivers carved the deepest canyons not through force, but through persistence. Drop by drop, day by day, the water found its way through the hardest stone. Taeho might be the weakest student at the Galactic Academy, but he was still here, and he wasn't going anywhere. 3 weeks had passed since Taeho's first day at the academy. The other students still treated him like he didn't belong, but he had stopped caring as much. Professor Cathron's words gave him strength during the hardest moments. The professor had started giving Taeho extra reading assignments about different species and their home worlds. The work was difficult but interesting. Taeho learned about ice planets where creatures lived inside glaciers, and desert worlds where beings could go years without water. On this particular morning, excitement filled the academy halls. Students gathered in small groups whispering about something important. Taeho couldn't understand what had everyone so worked up until he reached the main assembly hall. Commander Thexani floated at the front of the room, her Nimari form shimmering with energy. Behind her, a massive screen showed images of a distant planet. The world looked dead and empty, covered in strange ruins that stretched across entire continents. Students of the Academy, Commander Thexani announced, her voice carrying clearly through the translator system. Today we announce this year's advanced expedition to Kepler 442b. The room buzzed with excitement. The annual expedition was the Academy's most prestigious program. Only the best senior students were chosen to explore unknown worlds and make real discoveries. This planet once supported a massive civilization, the commander continued. But our long-range scans show it is now empty. We need to understand what happened to its people and catalog any remaining technology. Taeho stared at the images on the screen. The ruins looked strange and beautiful, like nothing he had ever seen on Earth. Massive towers twisted toward the sky, and crystal formations sparkled in the alien sunlight. The expedition team will consist of 12 senior students from different species, Commander Thexani said. They will spend 2 weeks on the planet's surface conducting research. Taeho felt a familiar sadness in his chest. As a first-year student, he had no chance of being selected. The expedition was for advanced students who had proven themselves through years of study. But then Professor Kethron spoke from his position among the faculty. His wet, whispered voice somehow carried across the entire hall. Commander, I request that Cadet Kim Taeho be added to the expedition roster. The hall fell completely silent. Every student turned to stare at Taeho, who felt his face burning with embarrassment. Why would Professor Kethron suggest such a thing? He was barely passing his basic classes. Commander Thexani's form flickered with surprise. Professor, the young Terran has been here only 3 weeks. This expedition requires experience and proven abilities. It requires fresh perspective, Professor Kethron replied firmly. The standard analysis methods have failed to explain what happened on Kepler 442b. Perhaps we need someone who thinks differently. Vextar's crystal body rang like a bell as he laughed loudly. What could a weak human contribute that our advanced sensors cannot detect? Other students joined in the laughter. Taeho wanted to disappear into the floor, but Professor Kethron continued speaking. That remains to be discovered. I believe the expedition would benefit from human insight. Commander Thexani was quiet for a long moment. Her floating form drifted back and forth as she considered the request. Finally, she spoke. Very well, Professor. Cadet Kim Taeho will join the expedition team, but he will be your responsibility. The announcement created an uproar among the students. Senior cadets who had worked for years to earn expedition spots were angry that a first-year human had been chosen over them. Taeho heard his name being whispered throughout the hall, and none of the comments were kind. After the assembly, Taeho tried to approach Professor Kethron, but the elderly Marathi was surrounded by other faculty members. Instead, Taeho found himself cornered by a group of senior students led by Vextar. Listen carefully, human. the Velkari said, his crystal skin gleaming with anger. You don't belong on this expedition. Stay out of our way and try not to get anyone killed with your incompetence. I didn't ask to be chosen, Teho replied quietly. No, but you were chosen anyway, said Nexara, a senior Nimari whose telepathic abilities made her one of the Academy's top students. Professor Kethron has made a serious mistake. We will not let your weakness endanger the mission. The other senior students nodded in agreement. Teho could see the resentment in their faces. They had earned their places through years of hard work, while he had been handed a spot he didn't deserve. That evening, Teho sat alone in his dormitory room reading about Kepler 442b. His roommates had gone to a celebration party for the chosen expedition members, but Teho hadn't been invited. He preferred studying anyway. The planet's history was fascinating and mysterious. Long-range observations showed evidence of a highly advanced civilization that had suddenly vanished about 500 years ago. No one knew what had caused their disappearance. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Teho attended briefings about planetary exploration, learned to use basic scientific equipment, and studied the limited data available about their destination. The other expedition members ignored him completely. Lee So-min, another human student who was 2 years ahead of Teho, found him in the library one evening. She was the only other human at the academy, and seeing her always made Teho feel less alone. I heard about the expedition, she said, sitting down across from him. How are you handling all the attention? Everyone thinks I don't deserve to be chosen, Teho admitted. Maybe you don't, So-min said bluntly. But Professor Kethron sees something in you that others miss. Trust his judgment. What if I fail? What if I prove that humans really are too weak for this kind of work? So-min leaned forward, her expression serious. Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying to do something important. That's better than never getting the chance at all. The day before departure, Teho packed his equipment bag with trembling hands. He had never been off-world before except for the journey to the academy. The thought of exploring an alien planet filled him with equal parts excitement and terror. That night he called his grandmother on Earth using the academy's communication system. Her familiar face appeared on the small screen, wrinkled with age but still sharp with intelligence. My brave grandson, she said in Korean, her voice warm despite the distance between them. I hear you're going on an adventure. I'm scared, grandmother. Everyone thinks I'll fail. Fear is natural when facing the unknown, she replied. But remember what I taught you. The river doesn't fear the mountain. It simply finds a way through. What if there is no way through? There is always a way, Teho. Sometimes it just takes longer to find than we expect. The next morning, the expedition team gathered at the Academy's shuttle bay, 12 students from 8 different species, plus Professor Kethron and 2 other faculty supervisors. The research vessel that would carry them to Kepler 442b waited on the landing pad like a sleeping metal giant. Teho shouldered his equipment bag and followed the group toward the ship. The other students walked in clusters based on their species, but he walked alone. No one spoke to him or acknowledged his presence. The ship's pilot met them at the boarding ramp. Teho had never seen anyone like him before. The being stood over 2 meters tall, covered in dark fur with features that looked predatory and intelligent. His species was called Raksani, according to Teho's studies, but he had never met one in person. Welcome aboard the Harmony's Edge, the pilot said, his voice deep and rumbling even through the translator. I am Kron Veltar. I will be your transportation and protection during this mission. The Raksani's eyes swept over the expedition team, pausing briefly on each student. When his gaze reached Teho, something flickered in those predatory eyes. Not mockery like the other students showed, but curiosity. First time off-world, young human? Kron asked directly. Second time, actually, Teho replied, feeling foolish the moment he said it. Kron's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing fangs that could have belonged to Earth's ancient saber-toothed cats. Honesty is rare among the young. Most would pretend greater experience. As they boarded the ship, Teho found himself assigned to the smallest cabin, barely large enough for his sleeping bag and equipment. The other students had larger quarters that better accommodated their various species' needs. The ship's departure was smooth and quiet. Teho pressed his face to his cabin's small window and watched the academy shrink below them. Soon they were in space, surrounded by stars that looked the same as they did from Earth. During the 3-day journey to Kepler 442b, Taeho spent most of his time alone. The other students made it clear he wasn't welcome in their study groups or meal conversations. He ate by himself and read about xenoarchaeology in his tiny cabin. The only being who spoke to him was Crone Veltar. The Raxani pilot seemed genuinely interested in human perspectives on space travel and alien contact. Their conversations were brief but friendly, a welcome break from the isolation. "Your species fascinates me," Crone said during one of their talks in the ship's observation lounge. "Physically weak by galactic standards, yet you reach the stars through determination alone." "We're stubborn," Taeho admitted. "My grandmother says humans are too stupid to know when to give up." Crone's laugh was like distant thunder. "Perhaps stupidity and co." The landing shuttle's doors opened with a soft hiss. Taeho stepped onto the surface of Kepler 442b and took his first breath of alien air. It tasted thin and dusty, like Earth's atmosphere at high mountain peaks. Around him, the ruined city stretched in every direction. Broken towers reached toward a pale sky, their surfaces covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim sunlight. Crystal formations lay shattered like broken glass, and metal structures had been twisted into impossible shapes. "Stay close to your assigned partners," Dr. Yexani called out. "We have 2 weeks to solve this mystery. Don't waste time." The expedition team split into pairs based on their specialties. The senior students chose partners they had worked with before, leaving Taeho standing alone until Park Ji-sung, a second-year human student, approached him. "Looks like we're stuck together," Ji-sung said without enthusiasm. He was older than Taeho and had never spoken to him before this mission. "Try not to slow me down." Dr. Yexani assigned them to explore the residential section of the ruined city. It was considered the least important area, far from the central structures where the real discoveries were expected. Taeho understood the message clearly. He was being given busy work to keep him out of the way. As they walked through the empty streets, Taeho couldn't help but wonder about the beings who had once lived here. The buildings were tall and graceful, with curved walls that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Doorways were shaped for creatures taller than humans but similar in basic body structure. "The scanner shows mostly debris," Ji-sung reported, checking his handheld device. "Nothing worth cataloging. We'll be done here in a few hours." But Taeho wasn't looking at his scanner. He was studying the destruction itself, trying to understand what had happened. The damage wasn't random like it would be from an explosion or natural disaster. There was a pattern to it, a direction that the destruction had followed. "Ji-sung, look at this," he called, kneeling beside a collapsed wall. "See how the debris falls? It's not from an explosion. Something pushed through here." Ji-sung glanced over without much interest. "The computer analysis doesn't show any pattern. You're seeing things that aren't there." But Taeho was certain. Growing up in Seoul, he had watched old buildings being torn down to make room for new ones. He knew what different types of destruction looked like. This wasn't caused by bombs or earthquakes. Something had moved through the city with purpose. He started following the pattern, tracking the path of destruction through the residential district. It led away from the smaller buildings toward the city's center, where the largest structures still stood. Ji-sung followed reluctantly, complaining about wasting time on pointless theories. The trail led them deeper into the ruins than Dr. Yexani had authorized them to go. But Taeho couldn't stop now. The pattern was becoming clearer with each block they traveled. Whatever had destroyed this city hadn't been random or mindless. It had been hunting for something specific. "We should go back," Ji-sung said nervously as they approached the city's central area. "We're not supposed to be here without backup." Taeho ignored him, focused on the trail of destruction. It led to a massive building made of black metal that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Unlike the crystal and flowing structures around it, this building was harsh and angular, completely different from the rest of the city's architecture. "That doesn't belong here," Taeho whispered, staring up at the dark structure. "It's not part of the original city." Ji-sung checked his scanner again. "I'm getting strange readings. The metal is blocking most signals, but there's definitely something active inside." That's when they heard the sound, a rhythmic scraping like claws on metal, coming from within the black building. Both humans froze, their hands moving instinctively to the emergency beacons on their belts. Before they could activate the beacons, shapes emerged from the building's shadowed entrances. They had once been the planet's inhabitants, tall and graceful like the beings who had built the Crystal City, but now they moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Parts of their bodies had been replaced with the same black metal as the building. Their eyes glowed with cold light that held no warmth or intelligence. They had become something between living creatures and machines, and they moved toward the two humans with obvious hostile intent. "Run," Ji-sung breathed. They ran through the maze of ruins, using the broken city as cover. But there were dozens of the mechanical creatures, and they seemed to know the ruins better than any living being should. They moved through the debris with unnatural speed and coordination. The chase led deeper into the city's heart, where the destruction was most complete. Here the very ground was scarred by whatever force had devastated this world. The mechanical beings emerged from hidden places among the rubble, surrounding the two humans. "Our communicators aren't working," Ji-sung gasped as they pressed themselves against a collapsed wall. "The black metal is blocking our signals." "The others don't know where we are," Taeho nodded grimly. They were on their own. Two humans against an army of creatures that had already destroyed one civilization. The emergency beacons were useless if no one could receive their signals. That's when they heard the roar. It wasn't mechanical like the sounds their pursuers made. This was organic, primal, and filled with fury that made both humans' blood run cold. But somehow it also offered hope. Something was fighting the mechanical beings, and it sounded like it was winning. The roar came again, closer this time, followed by sounds of combat that echoed through the ruins. Metal scraped against claws, and strange fluid splashed against broken stone. Whatever was out there was tearing through their mechanical enemies. Kronveltar appeared through the debris like a nightmare made real. His dark fur was matted with the oily fluid that served as blood for the mechanical creatures. His claws were extended, dripping with the same dark substance, but it was his eyes that struck Taeho most powerfully. They burned with intelligence and deadly purpose. "Little humans," he growled, his translator making his voice sound like contained thunder. "Your trail was easy to follow, but these machines hunt in patterns older than memory." "How did you find us?" Ji-sung asked, his voice shaking with relief. "I followed the scent of fear and the sound of running feet," Kron replied without mockery. "Your species leaves tracks that even a blind hunter could follow." More mechanical beings rounded a corner, their glowing eyes fixed on the small group. But instead of the panicked retreat that had marked the humans' earlier encounters, Kron stepped forward with predatory confidence. "Stay behind me," he commanded. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of why the Raksani were feared throughout the galaxy. Kron moved like liquid death, his claws and fangs finding weak points in the creature's armor with surgical precision. He didn't just fight them. He studied their movements, learned their patterns, and turned their own mechanical efficiency against them. But it wasn't just his physical prowess that impressed Taeho. It was his intelligence. Kron analyzed each opponent's behavior, adapted his tactics in real time, and anticipated their attacks before they made them. He was both predator and strategist, combining raw power with brilliant tactical thinking. Within minutes, the second group of mechanical beings lay destroyed around them. Kron stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily but unmarked by serious injury. The dark fluid on his claws steamed in the thin atmosphere. "We need to rejoin the others," he said, examining the mechanical debris. "These creatures are preparing for something. The whole city resonates with building energy, but as they tried to retrace their steps, they found their path blocked by more of the mechanical beings. The creatures seemed to emerge from every shadow, every pile of debris. Worse, they were learning from each encounter, adapting their tactics to counter Kron's fighting style. "They're hurting us," Taeho realized, studying the creature's movements. "Look at how they position themselves. They're not trying to kill us quickly. They're driving us toward something." Kron's ears flicked forward, a sign of intense concentration among his species. "The human sees what I suspected. We are not the hunters here." The realization came too late. The creatures had indeed been hurting them, pushing them deeper into the city's heart where the black metal building waited like a hungry mouth. As they approached its entrance, more mechanical sounds echoed from within. Ancient machinery was awakening after centuries of sleep. "Whatever's in there," Ji-sung whispered, "I don't think we want to meet it." But they had no choice. The mechanical beings pressed closer, leaving only one path open. The entrance to the black building yawned before them like the mouth of some technological beast. Kron tested the air with his enhanced senses. Something very old waits inside. Something that should have died long ago but chose transformation instead. The building's interior was a nightmare fusion of organic and mechanical elements. Cables that pulsed like arteries ran along walls of black metal. Chambers filled with thick fluid held shapes that might once have been the planet's inhabitants. At the center of it all, a presence waited that felt vast and alien and utterly hostile to all organic life. "More subjects," a voice spoke from hidden speakers throughout the chamber. "These specimens show interesting diversity. They will provide useful data for the next phase of evolution." The mechanical beings moved to surround them, but Crone stepped forward, placing himself between the creatures and the two humans. His stance was that of a predator backed into a corner, and every being in the galaxy knew what happened when you cornered a Raxani. "These are under my protection," he growled, his translator giving his words the weight of a formal declaration. The presence in the building focused on him like a physical force. Fascinating. The apex predator species forms protective bonds with prey animals. This behavior requires study. "They are not prey," Crone replied, his voice dropping to a register that made the metal walls vibrate. "They are pack." Tejo felt something shift in the air around them. Crone had just made a declaration that carried meaning beyond mere words. Among the Raxani, claiming someone as pack was a bond stronger than blood, unbreakable even by death. But more importantly, the declaration gave Tejo the moment of clarity he needed to understand what they were really facing. This wasn't just an abandoned city or a simple mystery to be solved. They had stumbled into something far more dangerous, and their survival would depend on thinking beyond conventional solutions. The pattern he had followed to reach this place wasn't random destruction. It was a containment protocol, designed by the planet's original inhabitants to keep something terrible trapped within the city's heart. And now they had walked directly into the trap that an entire civilization had died to create. Inside the black metal building, the air felt thick and wrong. Strange lights pulsed along the walls like a heartbeat, and the floor beneath their feet hummed with hidden energy. Tejo could feel something watching them from the shadows, something that had been waiting for centuries. The mechanical beings forced them deeper into the structure, their glowing eyes never blinking. Crone stayed between the creatures and the two humans, his claws ready for another fight. But even the mighty Raxani looked small in this place of twisted technology. "The architecture is impossible," Ji-Sung whispered, studying the walls with his scanner. "The space inside is larger than the building we saw from outside." "The geometry doesn't make sense," Tejo nodded grimly. His grandmother had told him stories about places where the normal rules didn't apply, but he had never expected to find one himself. This building existed partly in normal space and partly somewhere else entirely. They reached a vast central chamber where the true horror waited. Tanks of green fluid lined the walls, each one containing a shape that had once been one of the planet's inhabitants. But these beings were being slowly transformed. Their organic parts replaced piece by piece with black metal components. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that commanded attention through sheer presence. It had once been like the others, tall and graceful, but now it was more machine than living creature. Its eyes glowed with cold intelligence that felt ancient beyond measure. "Welcome, specimens," the figure spoke, its voice echoing from speakers throughout the chamber. "I am the curator, the last and greatest mind of a civilization that chose evolution over extinction." The mechanical beings arranged themselves in a circle around the three intruders. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, like parts of a single giant machine. Tejo realized that they weren't individual creatures anymore. They were extensions of the curator's will. "Your species show interesting diversity," the curator continued, studying them with sensors hidden throughout the chamber. "The predator specimen demonstrates superior physical capabilities. The two smaller ones display unusual problem-solving abilities despite their obvious weaknesses." Crone's lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed his deadly fangs. "We are not specimens for your experiments." The curator's mechanical laughter filled the chamber. "All biological life is material for improvement. My people understood this truth 500 years ago when they faced extinction. Rather than die as nature intended, we chose transformation." "What happened to them?" Tejo asked, looking at the tanks of green fluid. "What did you do to your own people?" "I elevated them beyond the limitations of flesh," the curator replied with pride in its artificial voice. "No more disease, no more aging, no more death. Perfect beings of metal and circuitry, free from biological weakness." But Tejo could see the truth in the mechanical beings around them. They moved without joy, without curiosity, without any of the things that made life worth living. The curator hadn't saved its people. It had destroyed everything that made them who they were. "They're not alive anymore," he said quietly. "You turned them into machines that look like people." The curator's glowing eyes focused on him with increased interest. The small specimen shows unexpected insight. "Yes, biological consciousness is inefficient and chaotic. I replaced it with perfect mechanical logic. But without consciousness, they're not the same people," Taeho argued. "You didn't save your civilization. You ended it." "I perfected it," the curator corrected. "And now I will perfect you as well. Your genetic patterns will provide valuable data for my next creations." The mechanical beings moved closer, but Crone stepped forward with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. His claws extended to their full length and every muscle in his powerful body coiled for action. "These are Pack," he declared again, his voice carrying the full authority of his species' most sacred bond. "I will die before allowing harm to come to them." The curator studied Crone with obvious fascination. "The predator species demonstrates irrational attachment to inferior beings. This behavior will be corrected during processing." "You don't understand," Taeho said, his mind racing as he tried to find a solution. "The destruction pattern I followed to get here wasn't random. Your own people tried to stop you." The ancient intelligence paused, its attention shifting to the young human. "Explain." "The path of destruction through the city," Taeho continued, hoping to buy them time. "It doesn't follow the pattern of an invasion or natural disaster. It's a containment protocol. Your people destroyed their own city to trap you here." Ji-sung's scanner beeped as he realized what Taeho was suggesting. "The building is a prison, not a fortress. The original inhabitants sacrificed everything to keep you contained." The curator's mechanical laughter returned, but now it sounded forced. "My creators were fools who feared progress. They destroyed themselves rather than accept the gift of perfection I offered them." "They understood what you really were," Taeho said with growing confidence. "Not a savior, but a virus. Something that destroys life while pretending to improve it." The chamber fell silent except for the humming of machinery. The curator's glowing eyes dimmed slightly as it processed this accusation. Around them, the mechanical beings stopped moving, as if waiting for orders. "The small specimen demonstrates dangerous thinking patterns," the curator finally said. "Such chaotic biological logic must be eliminated immediately." The mechanical beings surged forward, but Crone was already moving. His attack wasn't random violence, but surgical precision, aimed at the cables and connections that linked the curator to its servants. He understood instinctively that cutting the head from the beast might disable its body, but there were too many connections and even Raksani's strength had limits. The mechanical beings adapted to his attacks, changing their tactics to counter his fighting style. They were learning from each exchange, becoming more efficient with every passing moment. "The quarantine protocols," Taeho shouted as he dodged grasping mechanical arms. "If we can reactivate them, we can trap it again." "The original controls were biological," Ji-sung called back, his scanner finally picking up useful readings in the chamber's chaotic environment. "But they were destroyed when the city fell." Taeho's mind raced through everything he had learned about the planet and its history. The original inhabitants had been desperate enough to destroy their entire civilization to stop the curator. They must have built safeguards that could still work. "The activation sequence," he said suddenly. "It requires biological input from different species working together. That's why they built the quarantine to need multiple genetic signatures." The curator heard his words and commanded its servants to attack more aggressively. "The specimens will not be allowed to interfere with my work." But Taeho was already moving toward the crystalline panels he had noticed near the chamber's center. They looked decorative, but now he could see they were actually control interfaces waiting for biological contact. "Crone, I need you to trust me," he called to the fighting Raksani. "Always, little brother," came the reply between sounds of combat. The term of kinship sent warmth through Taeho's chest even as his hands found the first control panel. The crystal accepted his genetic signature with a pulse of warm light, recognizing him as a sapient being capable of making the same choice the original inhabitants had made. "Ji-sung, the second panel," he shouted. His fellow human understood immediately and pressed his hands against another crystalline surface. The panel glowed as it recorded his genetic pattern, adding it to the activation sequence. "The third signature," Taeho called to Crone. The Raksani broke away from combat. his predator's instincts trusting Taeho's plan completely. His clawed hands found the final panel, and the moment his genetic signature was accepted, everything changed. The black metal walls became transparent, revealing that they stood in the center of a vast crystalline matrix that extended throughout the entire city. Energy barriers of impossible complexity began forming around the central building, while the matrix generated a field that would prevent any signal from escaping the planet's atmosphere. "No," the curator raged, its artificial voice filled with something that might have been fear. "I will not be contained again. I will spread to the stars and perfect all biological life." But the quarantine protocols were already activating. The same safeguards that had trapped the curator for 500 years were rebuilding themselves, stronger and more complete than before. The prison would hold until the planet's sun burned out. The mechanical beings stopped moving as the quarantine field cut their connection to their master. Without the curator's control, they stood motionless like abandoned toys. The ancient intelligence found itself alone again, trapped in its metal prison. "The process is irreversible," Ji-sung reported, watching the energy readings on his scanner. "The quarantine is permanent." As they made their way out of the now sealed building, Taeho felt the weight of what they had accomplished. An entire civilization had sacrificed itself to stop the curator, and they had succeeded in completing that ancient mission. "How did you know?" Crone asked as they walked through the silent city. "How did you understand what the original inhabitants had planned?" "I watched the patterns," Taeho replied simply. "Sometimes the answer is hidden in plain sight." The rescue shuttle found them 3 hours later, guided by the emergency beacon Crone had activated, once they were clear of the black metal building's interference. The other expedition members stared in amazement at the crystalline prison that now dominated the city's center, containing horrors they could barely imagine. Dr. Yeksani was the first to speak as they boarded the shuttle. "What happened down there?" "Our instruments detected massive energy surges from the central district." Taeho looked at Crone and Ji-sung before answering. "We found what destroyed the civilization, and we made sure it can never escape again." The flight back to the main ship was filled with questions. The senior students who had ignored Taeho before now hung on his every word. Vextar, the Velkari who had mocked him, listened in silence as Taeho explained how he had tracked the destruction pattern through the city. "You followed debris patterns that our advanced scanners missed?" asked Nexara, the Nimari whose telepathic abilities made her one of the Academy's top students. "How is that possible?" "Sometimes seeing doesn't require special abilities," Taeho replied quietly. "Sometimes it just requires looking at things differently." Commander Thexani met them at the docking bay of the research vessel. Her ethereal form shimmered with energy as she listened to their report. When they finished explaining what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're telling me that 3 beings with no special abilities accomplished what an entire advanced civilization could not?" she asked finally. Professor Kethran answered before any of them could speak. "They succeeded because they were not trying to defeat the enemy through superior force. They sought to understand it. There is wisdom in that approach." The journey back to the Academy took 2 weeks. During that time, everything changed for Taeho. The other expedition members no longer treated him as a burden or an outsider. They sought his opinions on their research and included him in their discussions. But the most important change was his growing friendship with Crone Veltar. The Rexani had requested permission to extend his assignment, claiming he wanted to study human problem-solving methods. In reality, Taeho suspected that Crone simply enjoyed their conversations about different ways of seeing the universe. "Your species puzzles my people," Crone admitted one evening as they sat in the ship's observation lounge. "Humans are physically weak by galactic standards, yet you accomplish things that stronger species cannot." "Maybe that's exactly why we succeed," Taeho suggested. "Because we have to think our way around problems instead of just pushing through them." Crone's predatory features softened into what Taeho had learned was the Raksani equivalent of a smile. "Strength without wisdom is meaningless. Wisdom without courage is worthless. But wisdom combined with courage can move mountains." When they finally reached the Academy, word of their mission had already spread throughout the galactic community. Researchers wanted to study the quarantine field they had activated. Military leaders wanted to understand how 3 individuals had succeeded where advanced technology had failed. Most importantly, the Academy's faculty began to reconsider their approach to education. If a first-year human student could solve a mystery that had baffled experts for centuries, perhaps there was value in different perspectives that they had been overlooking. Tae-ho found himself at the center of attention he had never wanted. Students who had previously ignored him now sought him out for study groups. Faculty members invited him to guest lectures. Even species representatives from across the galaxy wanted to meet the young human who had helped save them from an ancient threat. The attention was overwhelming, but Tae-ho tried to handle it with the grace his grandmother had taught him. When reporters asked how he had succeeded where others failed, he always emphasized that it had been a team effort. "I couldn't have done anything without Ji-sung's technical knowledge and Kron's protection," he insisted during one interview. "Different species working together are stronger than any individual working alone." This message resonated throughout the galactic community. Species that had maintained rigid hierarchies based on physical or mental capabilities began to reconsider their assumptions. The Academy restructured its curriculum to include courses on cooperative problem-solving and cross-species collaboration. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other students treated him. Vextar, the Velkari who had mocked him on his first day, approached him in the Academy's central plaza one afternoon. "I owe you an apology. Terran," the crystalline being said, his voice lacking its usual arrogance, "I judged your species by your physical limitations and missed your true capabilities." "We all have different strengths," Tae-ho replied diplomatically. "Yes, but yours might be the most important of all," Vextar continued. "The ability to see patterns others miss, to find solutions where logic sees only problems. These are rare gifts in the galaxy." Similar conversations occurred throughout the following weeks. The rigid social structure at the Academy began to break down as students realized that diversity of thought was more valuable than uniformity of capability. Lee So-min found Tae-ho in the xenobiology lab one evening, where he now worked as Professor Kethran's research assistant. The old Marathi had offered him the position after seeing his natural talent for understanding alien species and their behaviors. "How does it feel?" So-min asked, gesturing at the research requests and collaboration offers that covered his workstation. "Being the human who changed everything?" Tae-ho looked up from the genetic analysis he was conducting. The work involved studying how different species developed their unique problem-solving abilities, with the goal of creating training programs that could enhance these skills through cooperative learning. "I didn't change anything," he said thoughtfully. "I just remembered something my grandmother used to tell me." "What was that?" "She said that every river starts as a single drop of water, but given time and persistence, it can carve through the hardest mountain. Humans aren't stronger or smarter than other species, but we don't give up. We find a way," So-min smiled. "And now the galaxy knows it." The real test of how much things had changed came when the Academy announced its next major expedition. This time, instead of choosing only senior students, they created mixed teams of different year levels and species. The goal was to combine experience with fresh perspectives. Tae-ho was asked to lead one of the teams, a responsibility that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. His team included Vextar, whose strength and technological knowledge complemented Tae-ho's pattern recognition abilities, and Neera, a young Nimari whose telepathic skills could coordinate their efforts. But the teammate he was most grateful for was Kron Veltar. The Rixani had officially requested assignment as the Academy's liaison to student expeditions, a position that let him work closely with human researchers while sharing his species' knowledge of tracking and survival. "Ready for another impossible mission, little brother?" Kron asked as they prepared for their first assignment together. "With you as pack," Tae-ho replied, using the Rixani term that had become natural to him. "Anything is possible." Their new mission was to investigate mysterious energy readings from a system on the galaxy's edge. 3 different survey ships had reported the same anomalous signals, but none could identify their source. The readings suggested technology beyond anything in the known galaxy, possibly from a species that had never made contact with galactic civilization. As their ship prepared for departure, Tae-ho reflected on how far he had come from the uncertain youth who had first walked the Academy's corridors. He was still human, still physically unremarkable compared to his alien colleagues, but he had learned that true strength came not from individual capability, but from the bonds formed with others. The other students no longer saw him as weak or worthless. They had learned that different didn't mean inferior, and that the galaxy's diverse species were stronger together than any of them could be alone. Professor Kethran had been right from the beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that raw power alone could not solve. It needed beings who could think differently, who could find patterns others missed, who could see hope where logic found only problems. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward their next adventure, Tejo smiled. He had found his place among the stars not by becoming something other than human, but by showing the galaxy what humanity could contribute to the greater whole. The weak human student had become a bridge between species, proof that cooperation and understanding could overcome any obstacle, and in a universe filled with wonders and dangers, that might be the most important discovery of all. Behind them, the Academy grew smaller in the viewport, but its influence spread throughout the galaxy, as other institutions adopted its new collaborative approach. What had begun as one young human struggle for acceptance had become something far greater. A new era of galactic cooperation, built on the simple understanding that every species had something valuable to offer. The river had found its crack in the mountain, and the resulting changes would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. 1 year after the Kepler 442b incident, Tejo stood in his new office aboard the Academy's premier research vessel. Through the massive viewport, he could see the swirling gases of the Vega Nebula where their latest mission would take them. Ships had been disappearing in this region for months, vanishing without any distress signals or wreckage. The pattern suggests intelligent intervention, Tejo observed, studying the star chart spread across his desk, but the timing between disappearances is irregular. Whatever is causing this doesn't follow mechanical logic. Crone leaned over his shoulder, his predator's instincts analyzing the data from a different perspective. The Raxani had become Tejo's permanent partner after their success on Kepler 442b, and their friendship had grown stronger with each mission they completed together. The intervals match hunting cycles, Crone said thoughtfully. Something is using the shipping routes as feeding grounds. But what could threaten modern starships? Tejo wondered aloud. The vessels that disappeared had heavy shields and military-grade weapons, something that learned to adapt faster than its prey could develop defenses. Their investigation team had expanded since their first mission together. Vextar now served as their technical specialist, his crystal body housing sensors more advanced than most ship computers. Nira Thess provided telepathic coordination, her abilities allowing the team to communicate instantly across vast distances. Even Ji Sung had joined them permanently, his knowledge of ship systems proving invaluable. But at the center of it all remained the partnership that had started everything. The young human who saw patterns others missed, and the apex predator who had claimed him as family. "Contact ahead," Nira announced, her ethereal form shimmering as she received telepathic data from their scout ships. "We're detecting energy signatures unlike anything in our databases." The main viewer activated, showing them what their sensors had found. At first it looked like empty space punctuated by ordinary cosmic debris, but as Tejo studied the images, he began to see the pattern that had eluded their instruments. "They're not random objects," he said suddenly. "Look at the positioning. They're arranged in a deliberate formation like a net stretched across the shipping lane." Crone's ears flicked forward with interest. "A trap? Or a hunting ground," Tejo replied. "Something is waiting here for ships to pass through." As if summoned by his words, the empty space around them began to change. What had appeared to be cosmic debris revealed itself as something far more alien. Beings of pure energy materialized around their ship. Creatures that existed without physical form but radiated intelligence and hunger. "They're feeding on our power systems," Vextar reported, his crystal body pulsing with alarm. "The exotic matter in our drive core is attracting them." The energy beings swarmed around their ship like luminous sharks, testing their shields and probing for weaknesses. But instead of panic, Tejo felt the familiar calm that came when pieces of a puzzle finally clicked into place. "They're not attacking us," he realized. "They're trying to communicate." "Communicate?" Ji Sung asked from his position at the engineering station. "They're draining our power reserves." "Because they don't understand what they're doing," Tejo explained. "Look at their behavior patterns. They're curious, not hostile. They investigate our ship the same way we might examine an interesting rock." Through careful observation and pattern analysis, Tejo began to understand the energy being's nature. They existed in the spaces between normal matter, feeding on the exotic particles that powered starship drives. To them, passing vessels were simply interesting phenomena that occasionally provided sustenance. They had no concept that the ships contained living beings. In their experience, intelligence existed only in energy form like themselves. The idea that consciousness could be trapped inside solid matter was as alien to them as their existence was to biological species. Working with Nira's telepathic abilities and Vextar's technical knowledge, Tejo found a way to establish basic communication with the energy beings. The first contact with a truly alien intelligence was awkward and confusing, filled with misunderstandings and failed attempts at meaning. But gradually, a dialogue emerged. The energy beings learned that the ships they had been investigating contained sapient life forms. They were horrified to discover that their feeding had been causing deaths, and immediately agreed to modify their behavior to avoid inhabited systems. Another impossible situation resolved through understanding rather than force. Commander Thexani observed when they reported their success. "You continue to prove that cooperation achieves more than conflict. This mission, like others before it, enhanced Tejo's growing reputation as someone who could solve problems that conventional approaches couldn't handle. But more importantly, it strengthened the bonds between team members from different species. They had become more than colleagues or even friends. They were family, chosen rather than born, united by shared experiences and mutual trust. Krone's declaration of pack loyalty had created something new in galactic society. A multi-species family bound by love rather than biology. The success led to more challenging assignments. Ancient mysteries that had puzzled researchers for centuries. First contact situations with species so alien that normal diplomatic protocols failed completely. Crisis situations where quick thinking and unconventional solutions meant the difference between disaster and success. With each mission, their reputation grew. The team became known throughout the galaxy as the ones to call when traditional methods failed. Universities wanted to study their techniques. Military leaders sought their advice on dealing with unknown threats. Philosophers debated what their success meant for the future of galactic civilization, but their greatest test came when long-range sensors detected something emerging from the dark matter regions at the galaxy's edge. Ancient signals suggested that something vast and intelligent was awakening after eons of slumber. Something that regarded all current galactic civilization as an infestation to be cleansed. The preliminary reports were terrifying. Ships made of crystallized spacetime, weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics, and intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions and had been planning its return for millions of years. "This is beyond anything we've faced before," Commander Thexani briefed them during the emergency assembly. "Every species in the galaxy will need to work together if we hope to survive." For the first time in galactic history, all major civilizations agreed to unite their forces. The Velkari contributed their technological expertise. The Nimari provided psychic coordination across impossible distances. The Marathi shared their vast databases of historical knowledge. The Rexani offered their warrior skills and tactical brilliance. And humanity brought what they had always brought, the ability to see patterns others missed, to find hope where logic saw only despair, and to refuse to give up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. At the center of the unified effort stood the team that had started it all. Tejo and Kron, the human and the predator who had become brothers. Their partnership had proven that the galaxy's greatest strength lay not in the power of individual species, but in their willingness to work together despite their differences. As the combined fleets prepared to face the ancient threat, Tejo stood with his chosen family on the bridge of their command ship. Around them, beings from dozens of worlds worked together with a coordination that would have been impossible just years earlier. "Ready for the biggest impossible mission yet, little brother?" Kron asked, his predatory features soft with affection. "With you as pack," Tejo replied, "and all of them as family. We can face anything." The ancient intelligence waiting in the dark matter clouds had planned its return for eons, confident that the young species of the current galaxy would fall easily before its superior knowledge and power. It had not planned for something unprecedented in galactic history. Genuine cooperation between diverse species united by bonds stronger than fear. Behind them, the Academy continued its work of training young beings from across the galaxy to think beyond the limitations of their individual species. The curriculum now emphasized collaboration and understanding as much as technical knowledge. Students learned that their differences were strengths to be celebrated, not weaknesses to be overcome. Professor Kethran, now ancient even by Marathi standards, watched the departing fleets from his laboratory window. The elderly researcher smiled as much as his species' physiology allowed. The young human he had recognized and nurtured had grown into something remarkable. A bridge between species. A proof that understanding and persistence could overcome any obstacle. The galaxy faced its greatest challenge, but it no longer faced it alone. Different species had learned to work together, to value each other's unique contributions and to find strength in their diversity. Whatever emerged from the dark matter clouds would discover that the scattered, competing civilizations it expected to find had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a united galaxy that refused to surrender. In the vast darkness of space, surrounded by beings who had once dismissed him as worthless, Kim Tae-ho smiled. He had found his place among the stars not by becoming something other than human, but by showing the galaxy what humanity could contribute to the greater whole. The weak human student had become the catalyst for the greatest alliance in galactic history. Sometimes the smallest stone could start an avalanche that reshaped entire mountain ranges. The river had found its crack, and nothing would ever be the same. As their ship jumped toward the unknown threat waiting at the galaxy's edge, Tae-ho felt the presence of his chosen family around him. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. And together they were unstoppable. The stars themselves seemed to whisper approval as the united fleets of a dozen species followed their lead into the darkness. Proof that what had begun as one young being's struggle for acceptance had become something far greater. A new age of cooperation that would echo through the cosmos for millennia to come.